The light just after sunset carries a particular quality that changes everything. Darkness doesn't arrive all at once, but softens the world gradually, blurring edges and muting the day's noise until something else emerges in its place. What you hear isn't silence exactly, but a different kind of sound. The hum of your own breathing, furniture settling into place, and the distant murmur of a world that has agreed for a moment to leave you alone. That's when you feel it, the relief. Not relief from escaping something terrible, but the relief of returning, of coming back to a place you've been away from all day. That place is yourself. When you love quiet evenings, you know this feeling intimately. And it's not that you dislike people or run from connection. There's just a specific kind of peace that only arrives when the day has emptied itself out, when demands have quieted, when you're finally allowed to exist without performance or translation. You're not lonely in these moments, but found. The world doesn't always understand this, though. We've been taught that aliveness looks like movement, like noise, like plans, that Friday night should be vibrant and full, that solitude is what happens when connection fails. Without even realizing it, you've learned to feel a little guilty about the evenings you crave, as if wanting to be alone with your thoughts is a small betrayal of vitality itself. It isn't. What happens in those quiet hours isn't withdrawal, but recalibration. Psychologists talk about optimal arousal theory, the idea that each of us has a threshold for stimulation. And when we exceed it, everything inside us begins to fray. Some people have a high threshold and need the buzz of crowds, the sparkle of conversation, the electricity of constant motion to feel alive. Your threshold is different, not lower but different, and your nervous system is tuned to a frequency that hears meaning in stillness rather than noise. Neither is wrong and neither is better. They're just different ways of being human. You've probably spent years wondering if something was wrong with you, why you'd rather stay in than go out, why small talk feels like wading through static, why after a day of interacting with the world, you don't feel energized but like you've been translated into a language that isn't quite yours. Now you need time to remember the one that is. Quiet evenings are where that remembering happens. You're not antisocial, but selectively social. Not avoiding life, but protecting the part of yourself that makes life feel real. For you, meaning doesn't come from the accumulation of experiences, but from the digestion of them. And digestion requires stillness, the kind of spaciousness that only a quiet evening can offer. When you close the door at the end of the day, when you dim the lights and let the world recede, you're not shutting anything out but letting something in. Your own presence, your own voice, the quiet thoughts that got drowned out by everything else. In that space, you become who you actually are, not the version that adapts and adjusts and manages, not the one who smiles on cue or answers questions or fills silences. Just you, unperformed, unedited, whole. This is what people who don't crave quiet evenings often misunderstand. They think solitude is an absence when for you it's a presence. It's where you meet yourself again and again, like an old friend you've been too busy to see. There's a reason some people can walk into a crowded room and feel alive, while you walk into that same room and feel like you're wearing someone else's skin. It has to do with how your brain processes the world, not better or worse, but differently. The research calls it sensory processing sensitivity, and about 15 to 20% of people are born with nervous systems that take in more detail, more texture, more emotional undertone. You notice the flicker of the fluorescent light that no one else seems to register. You feel the shift in someone's mood before they've even spoken, and you absorb the atmosphere of a place the way some people absorb facts. This isn't a disorder, and it's not something to fix, but a temperament. And like all temperaments, it comes with gifts and costs. The gift is depth. You experience life in high definition where a conversation isn't just an exchange of words, but an entire landscape of subtext and silence, an unspoken feeling. A piece of music doesn't just sound pleasant, but rearranges something inside you. And a quiet evening isn't empty, but full of everything you couldn't process while the world was demanding your attention. The cost is overwhelm, because when you take in more, you also reach capacity faster. What feels like a normal day to someone else can feel like sensory flooding to you. The chatter and brightness and expectations and emotional labour of navigating other people's needs accumulates. By the time evening comes, you're not just tired, but overstimulated. Your nervous system asking, and sometimes begging for a chance to reset. That's when the quiet evening becomes necessary. Not optional, but necessary. Your brain has a particular way of restoring itself, and it requires something neuroscientists call the default mode network. This is the part of your brain that activates when you're not focused on the external world, when you're daydreaming or reflecting or letting your mind wander. It's the network responsible for self-referential thought, for making meaning, for integrating experiences into the fabric of who you are. And here's the thing, it only fully activates in stillness. When you're constantly engaged with the external world through talking and performing and responding, your brain doesn't get the chance to turn inward. The default mode network stays quiet, and without it, you lose access to something vital. You lose the ability to know what you actually think, what you actually feel, who you actually are beneath all the roles you play. Quiet evenings give you that access back. They're not about doing nothing, but about doing the kind of something that looks like nothing to everyone else. You're processing and integrating, letting the experiences of the day settle into understanding, allowing your mind to make connections it couldn't make while it was busy managing the outside world. This is why after a quiet evening, you often wake up with clarity you didn't have before, why a problem that felt insurmountable suddenly has a solution, why you finally know how you feel about something you've been avoiding. Your brain was working even when it looked like rest. There's another layer here though, something even quieter. Quiet evenings also regulate your emotions in ways that social interaction often can't. Because when you're with other people, you're constantly adjusting, matching their energy, managing their reactions, navigating the invisible choreography of social connection. That's beautiful but also taxing, because you're not just being yourself, but being yourself in relation to someone else. In solitude, that relational work stops. You don't have to manage anyone's feelings, including your own. You can let yourself feel what you feel, without performance or explanation. Sadness doesn't need to be justified, and joy doesn't need to be shared. You can simply exist in the weather of your own inner life, without needing to translate it for anyone else. In that untranslated space, something softens. The tension you didn't even know you were holding begins to release. Your breath slows, your thoughts lose their jagged edges. You come back into your body, into your own rhythm, into the quiet truth of what it feels like to be you. This is also connected to something psychologists call attachment style. Growing up in an environment where your emotional needs weren't always met, or where love felt conditional, on performance might have taught you early that people are unpredictable. That connection requires vigilance. Even as an adult, being around others, even people you love, can activate a low-grade anxiety you don't always notice. Quiet evenings become the place where that vigilance can finally rest, where you don't have to be on alert, where you're safe not because no one can hurt you, but because you're the only one there. It's not about people being bad, but about you needing a place where you don't have to brace yourself, where you can let your guard down completely. For many people who love quiet evenings, solitude is the only place that feels safe enough for that kind of surrender. There's also the reality of what researchers call the social battery. And it's not a metaphor, but a measurable phenomenon. Social interaction, especially for people with heightened sensitivity, depletes cognitive resources, where decision-making becomes harder, emotional regulation becomes harder, and even simple tasks feel heavier. Quiet evenings recharge that battery, not by adding anything, but by subtracting, by removing the demand, by giving your system permission to stop producing and start restoring. The people who love you might not understand this. They might think you're shutting them out, that you're depressed or distant or difficult, but you're not. You're just honouring the way your particular mind and body need to move through the world, protecting your capacity to show up as yourself rather than a depleted version of yourself. The truth is, you're not less social because you love quiet evenings, but more intentional. You're not avoiding connection, but preserving the quality of it, knowing that real intimacy and real presence requires a reservoir of inner stillness. You can't give that to anyone if you haven't given it to yourself first. The world has opinions about how you spend your evenings, and those opinions have a way of seeping in even when you try not to let them. Somewhere along the way, we absorb the idea that a good life is a full life, that your calendar should overflow, that Friday night is for going out and not staying in, that if you're not busy, you're not living. Beneath all of that is a quieter and more insidious message, that choosing to be alone means something is missing, that solitude is what happens when connection fails. When you choose a quiet evening over dinner with friends, when you decline the invitation to the party, when you say no to plans that everyone else seems excited about, a small voice whispers asking what's wrong with you, even though you know rationally that nothing is wrong with you. The doubt lingers because the world doesn't celebrate the people who go inward. It celebrates the ones who go outward, the ones who are visible and engaged and connected in ways that can be photographed and shared. You scroll through your phone and see everyone else's highlight reel, the dinners and gatherings and proof of aliveness, and you wonder just for a moment if you're missing out. The life you're living, quiet and interior and yours, might somehow be less than the life you're supposed to want. This is FOMO, but it's deeper than just fear of missing out. It's the fear that your way of being doesn't count, that the richness you find in a quiet evening, with a book or your thoughts or the slow unfolding of your own presence, isn't valid unless someone else witnesses it, unless it translates into the language the world understands. You feel guilty not because you're doing anything wrong, but because you're doing something different, and different in a world that values sameness always feels a little like failure. The people who love you don't always help either. They worry and ask if you're okay with a tone that suggests they've already decided you're not. They invite you out again and again as if your refusal is a problem to be solved rather than a preference to be respected. They tell you that you need to get out more, to socialise, to live a little, as if the life you're living doesn't count. The hard part is they mean well and they're trying to help, but what they don't understand is that their version of help feels like pressure, like an insistence that your way of recharging is wrong, that your need for quiet is something to overcome and not something to honour. You start to question yourself. Maybe they're right. Maybe you are isolating. Maybe you should push yourself more. You say yes when you want to say no. You go to the dinner and the party and the gathering. You smile and engage and do all the things that are supposed to make you feel connected. And that's when you come home feeling more alone than ever, because you spent the entire evening performing a version of yourself that isn't quite real. Now, in the quiet you finally have, you're too depleted to even enjoy it. This is the particular loneliness of being misunderstood. Not the loneliness of being unloved, but the loneliness of being loved for who people think you should be rather than who you are. There's also a cultural dimension to this where we live in a society that equates productivity with worth. Rest is only valuable if it makes you more productive later. Quiet is only acceptable if it's in service of output. And the idea that you might spend an evening doing nothing, truly nothing, feels almost transgressive. If you're not producing or optimizing or using your time to become better and faster and more, then what's the point? Quiet evenings aren't about productivity though, they're about presence. And presence doesn't produce anything except itself. It doesn't have a measurable outcome, it doesn't improve your resume or expand your network or make you more valuable in the eyes of the world. It just makes you more yourself, and in a culture that doesn't know how to value that, it's easy to feel like you're wasting time. The pandemic complicated this in unexpected ways, where suddenly everyone was forced into the kind of stillness that you had been choosing all along. For a moment it seemed like the world might finally understand that quiet evenings might be seen as valuable and not just acceptable. But as soon as the world opened back up, the pendulum swung hard in the other direction. People were desperate to make up for lost time, to be social and visible and prove they were alive. And if you didn't share that desperation, if you discovered that you actually liked the slower pace and quieter rhythm, then suddenly you were the problem again. Here you are trying to navigate a world that still doesn't understand, trying to honour your own needs while managing other people's expectations, trying to hold on to the quiet you crave without losing the people you love. It's exhausting. Not the quiet, but the explaining, the justifying, the constant negotiation between what you need and what everyone else thinks you should need. The truth is, you shouldn't have to explain. Your need for quiet evenings is as valid as someone else's need for noise. Your preference for solitude is as legitimate as someone else's preference for company. You're not broken and you're not antisocial, And you're not missing out. You're just listening to a different voice, the one inside you, the one that knows what you need to feel whole. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is trust it. What if you stopped apologizing for it? What if you stopped treating your love of quiet evenings as something to justify and started treating it as something to honor? Not as a phase you'll grow out of, or a flaw you need to fix, but as a fundamental part of how you're built. A feature and not a bug. Choosing a quiet evening isn't about rejecting the world, but about returning to yourself. And that return is sacred. There's a particular kind of homecoming that happens when you close the door at the end of the day, when you shed the persona you wore out there, the one that's polite and accommodating and easier, and let yourself settle back into the shape you naturally take when no one's watching. It's not dramatic, and it's not even something you'd know how to explain to someone else, but it's real. In that space, something becomes possible that isn't possible anywhere else. You get to hear yourself think, not the thoughts you're supposed to have, or the ones that will make you sound smart or good or together, just the actual thoughts. The ones that meander and contradict and surprise you. The ones that only emerge in stillness. This is where creativity lives. Not in the brainstorming sessions or the collaborative energy or the productive hustle. It lives in the margins. In the moments when your mind is allowed to wander without agenda. When you're not trying to produce anything. And something gets produced anyway. A realization. A connection. A new way of seeing something you've looked at 1,000 times. Quiet evenings are where the subconscious finally gets to speak, because during the day, your conscious mind is too loud. It's managing and deciding and responding and performing. It doesn't have space for the quieter truths that need room to emerge. But in the stillness of evening, those truths rise to the surface, gently and carefully, like something that's been waiting all day for permission to exist. This is why your quiet evenings aren't selfish but generative. They're where you become the version of yourself that has something real to offer the world. Not the depleted and overstimulated version, not the one running on autopilot, but the version that's clear and grounded and actually present. That requires boundaries though, real ones, not the apologetic kind where you say yes but wish you'd said no. The kind where you say no clearly and kindly because you know what you need. This is hard because boundaries feel like rejection to the people who don't understand them. When you say that you need tonight to yourself, what they hear is that you don't want to be with them. And that's painful for them. Their pain makes you want to take it back, to reassure them, to say yes after all. But here's what you have to remember. Their discomfort with your boundary is not your responsibility to manage. You can be kind and you can be loving, and you can explain if you want to, but you don't have to sacrifice your own needs to make them comfortable with a choice that's yours to make. The people who truly love you will learn to understand, not because they feel the same way, but because they care about what you need, even when it's different from what they need. They'll stop taking it personally, and they'll stop trying to fix you. They'll just let you be. And the ones who don't, the ones who keep pushing, and insisting that your way is wrong, you might have to love them from a little more distance. Not because you're abandoning them, but because you're protecting something that matters, your right to exist in a way that feels true. There's also something quietly spiritual about this practice, not religious necessarily, but spiritual in the sense that it's about reverence, about treating your inner life as something worth tending, about recognizing that there's a dimension to existence that isn't visible and isn't measurable but is absolutely real. Philosophers have talked about this for centuries, the idea that solitude isn't loneliness, but the condition in which you can meet something larger than yourself. Whether you call it God or the universe or your own deeper knowing doesn't matter. What matters is that it requires quiet to hear it. When you spend your evenings in that quiet, you're not escaping life but touching the part of life that gets drowned out by everything else. The part that whispers instead of shouts. The part that asks questions instead of giving answers. You're also creating rituals whether you realize it or not. The way you make your tea, the corner of the couch where you always sit, the particular light you prefer, the sounds you allow, and the ones you don't. These aren't just habits, but ceremonies, small and private ways of marking the transition from the world's time to your own. In those rituals, you're telling yourself something important, that this matters, that you matter, that your need for this is real. Because it is real. Your need for quiet evenings isn't a luxury or an indulgence or a sign of weakness, but how you stay sane in a world that often feels like it's designed to fragment you. It's how you remember who you are when everything else is trying to tell you who to be. That's not selfish, but survival, self-preservation in the truest sense. Maybe the question isn't what's wrong with you for loving quiet evenings, but what your life would look like if you stopped apologizing for it. What if you trusted that the way you're built is exactly right for the life you're meant to live? That your need for stillness isn't something to overcome, but something to protect? That the quiet you crave is actually where you become most fully yourself? The world needs that version of you. The one who's had time to think and feel, and digest and come home. The version that shows up clear-eyed and whole, not because you've pushed through exhaustion, but because you've honoured what you needed to stay intact. That's the gift of quiet evenings. Not that they make you different from everyone else, but that they allow you to be who you actually are. In a world that's constantly asking you to be someone else, that's the most courageous thing you can do.